For those of you just joining the Uptempo webinar from Intent to Impact, thank you for taking some time out of your day today to learn about the marketing planning blueprint. My name is Jim Williams. I am the CMO at Uptempo. And usually I say, well, wait a few minutes to get started. But seeing as we have so much to cover, so much good stuff for everyone on the call, I think we're going to go ahead and jump right into it. So a couple of things. I am going to introduce our stellar panel of hosts in just a minute. But before I do that, of course, I'm always reminded to go through the housekeeping items, you know, the standard thing you have to do on every webinar. So if you're joining today and you have a whole bunch of colleagues that are super interested in this topic, but could not join, have no fear. Of course, we're going to record it. And we're going to send out the recording to everyone right after our webinar today. We will be doing Q&A, as most webinars have. And I can't find the Q&A feature in this interface, so just use the chat function. You can chat at any time during the course of the webinar. We will address those questions at the end, answer them to the best of our ability. But please go ahead and use it. Just fire it in as they come up. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. First, a little bit about Uptempo, the host of today's webinar. If you are not familiar with us, Uptempo is marketing planning software. We help enterprise marketing teams plan better, spend smarter, and execute with confidence. And we do that with an integrated campaign planning and financial management platform. We call it a single system of record for marketers. So we're going to talk a lot about planning concepts and frameworks. And at the end of it, you may be wondering, well, how do I manage all this? Well, quick answer to that is on a platform for plan and spend. Enough of my commercial. I'm going to go ahead and get started. And let's do that by introducing my fellow hosts on today's webinar. I'll start with Kathy, because Kathy actually is from Inverta, not from Uptempo. I've been working with Kathy a long time. I highly value her expertise. She is at a company called Inverta, which does a lot in the area of marketing strategy and execution. Specifically, today's topic, it's important to know that Inverta has successfully implemented comprehensive planning frameworks at hundreds of organizations. Small organizations, large organizations, tech organizations, other verticals, all the way to globally distributed enterprises. So she is a verified expert when it comes to campaign planning. We're going to hear a lot of that expertise on today's call. And of course, I'm joined by Bruce Ryan, who is our SVP of Global Solutions Engineering at Uptempo. Bruce does many things, and he does many things really well. But most importantly, he spent 5 years at Serious Decisions as CTO. And he was doing that when he was there, he was implementing planning best practices and frameworks and developing the legendary Serious Decisions hands-on workshops for clients, which later, of course, became part of the Forrester Decisions offering. So a lot of expertise. I am surrounded by people that are eminently smarter than I am, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Again, go ahead and fire in your questions as we go, but I'll just jump right into it. Why are we talking about marketing planning? Well, frankly, it's because, as sad as it may be, marketers kind of suck at planning. And this is for a variety of reasons. I'm not saying all marketers, some people are excellent at this, but as a whole, marketers aren't great at planning. And there's so many reasons for that. Well, for one, there's really no formal training. You know, you got a degree in marketing, there isn't a lot of time spent on the planning process. You kind of learn it as you go. And when you do learn it, you've gotten pretty far in your career. You know, you get involved in planning when you're managing teams and budgets, have some scope of authority. And at that point, that's when you're figuring out what is the best way to plan. It's a highly visible exercise, which turns into a high pressure exercise. You're not just planning for your team or your function, but what you plan is going to be visible to the executive team and perhaps even the board. And perhaps you'll be even asked to present that plan to stakeholders across your organizations. There's a lot of pressure. It's deadline driven. It can start as early as 9 months out from when your plan goes into effect. For many of us, it's more like 4 or 5 months, but it's deadline driven. There's multiple stakeholders that cross business functions in the enterprise, potentially millions of dollars at stake, right? You're going to invest a lot behind this plan. So you got to justify it. And it tends to be a bit of a gut feel exercise. Sure, your plan is informed by past performance, what's worked and what hasn't worked, but a lot of it is best guess at what's going to work for this particular year's strategic objectives. And of course, I always love this quote, but if you're familiar with the legendary Mike Tyson, he has a quote that says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And that is somewhat sad reality for marketers. You know that this plan that you're meticulously putting together and presenting is probably going to change pretty quickly, right? We live in a world of almost constant pivots. And so you got to be prepared to change that plan when the time comes, because it'll come soon. So in order to help marketers navigate this complex planning process, we have boiled it down to 7 key steps that we're going to outline for you today. These 7 steps are going to be outlined in depth in our forthcoming blueprint for marketing planning, which will be available, I like to say, in July, but Tao on my team says August is more realistic. And so everybody on this call will be receiving the marketing planning blueprint. So these are the steps we're going to go through, everything from aligning the business goals to setting your strategy to defining your campaigns, planning them, fitting the budget into those plans. How do you execute? What do you need to keep in mind when executing your campaigns? And how to better measure your campaign ROI so you can optimize over the course of the forthcoming year. These are the 7 steps that I am excited to go through. And so to start that, I am going to hand off to Bruce to talk about step 1 and 2.
Thanks, Jim. So yeah, this is an exciting section of the presentation here today. We get to talk about the very high level and strategic pieces. And in step 1, we're going to be really focused on alignment to business goals. And in step 2, we're going to talk about how marketing will set their goals. Now, we're going to kind of handle both of these together in terms of the slide structure in the presentation. But let's go ahead and start thinking about that. When we think about marketing planning, one of the things we really have to be cognizant of is this idea of this annual marketing planning. That's actually in the middle of the overall flow of what we're talking about. And that's where we get that 1 year kind of fiscal year horizon standpoint. We're aligning to budget. That's the thing we think of as the marketing plan. But wrapped around that, we've got our, at the highest level, our business plan, our corporate strategy, typically a 3 to 5 year horizon. And this is the focus of the business. And we need that insight to inform our plan. But there's another step that has to happen in between getting that corporate strategy and then putting together the annual marketing plan, and that is the revenue planning. We need to get coordinated and aligned with sales as to how they're going to go to market, how they intend to fulfill their obligations, because the marketing plan needs to support that. So if we have the business strategy and we have the business plans and we can coordinate that with sales and do the revenue planning, that's where we can begin to put together this focus on the annual marketing plan. From there, we begin to cascade down into the tactical side of planning. And that's where we get into campaign planning, which is typically messaging driven, in that within my annual marketing plan, I'm going to have a series of campaigns or themes or messages that I want to drive through. This is typically defining the purpose behind the plan. So we get those campaign plans in place. Then we get into the objectives within the theme, within the plan. What are we trying to accomplish? And we call that program planning. That's typically, now we're getting down into monthly to quarterly. I might hold budget in reserve and phase it into the quarter as I get closer, as my objectives change and I want to hone in on things. So that we start to get really granular at that point. And then we'll close out with a tactic calendar at some point. the bottoms up has to meet the top down, and we have to understand quite specifically what tactics we're going to execute in market. What does that look like from a calendar perspective? And that's what we actually execute on. That's what we're going to build the content for. That's what we're going to build and activate that content against. And that's where the execution hits the road, and that's where we'll start to think about measurement. But when we think of marketing planning, it can't be just thinking about the campaign planning or the annual marketing plan in the middle. It has to cascade out in both directions. It has to be informed. And if we think about it in that type of cadence, it's happening all year long. It's not an event. It's not a single event that happens one week during the year. It happens all throughout the year. And in fact, some of it happens simultaneously. Your program and tactic planning is going to be happening for the current year, while your corporate strategy and annual revenue planning are happening for the next year. So there's not only is it sequential, but it's also overlapping. There's a lot to think about in that regard. But I want to take us in a slightly different direction now. And that is, how do we prioritize the different aspects of our plan? How do we figure out where to allocate budgets and where to allocate, what are our priorities? How do we pull that together? Well, when you look at growth that can be impacted by marketing, it really comes in four flavors. We could focus truly and exclusively on productivity, and that is becoming more efficient within a specific um, area. The next area we might look at is offers, where we might be launching new products or services, bringing new products to market. Speaking of markets, that's actually the third way that we can impact growth. We can enter or expand into and open up new markets. This could be verticals in a B2B space, or it could be new demographics or new geographies from a B2C point of view. When we think about our last pillar, we're thinking about buyers at this point. We could be targeting new buying centers or individual personas, and that may be how we want to grow. Now, I don't want to confuse anybody. We're certainly not saying that you pick one of these and that's the one that you go focus on. What we're saying is one of these will be the primary, and that's the one that will drive how we think about the others. You need to think about all four of these when you think about your growth. But the way we want to look at this is, if I put a different item at the top of the pyramid for each of these different scenarios, there's not only four different pillars, there's four different ways to think about it. And if I put productivity at the top, I start asking myself questions like, how can we be more productive across our buyers, markets, and offers? So now when I think about buyers, markets, and offers, I think about them in terms of, how do I get more productive? And if I move across to offers, I'm thinking about, how do I open new markets or approach new buyers and be more productive with our new offers? So I look at markets from the standpoint of offers. And working our way around the slide, and we get down to the bottom right there, we put buyers as the focal point. How do we adapt our offers? How do we approach new markets and be more productive while approaching these new buyers that we believe we can have an impact on? And then finally, with markets, if we put markets at the top, how do we adapt our offers and approach new buyers and be more productive while we're opening new markets? So if the focus is markets, think about it from that perspective. That's going to really help you in terms of setting priorities and determining what percentage of the budget that you want to be able to allocate to each of these focal points based on what the overall priorities of the business are. And if you've been informed by the corporate strategy, you should be in a position to do that. Language matters. And we're going to get into this again a little bit later when we talk about measurement. But your taxonomy matters. When you're talking about global organizations and large scale planning efforts, you got to get everybody on the same page. So we've got to understand what we mean by a campaign hierarchy, the definition of that being how we organize and link and relate and nest different aspects of our campaign planning underneath each other. By definition, a campaign is usually the theme based on a business need or an audience need that we're trying to focus on. It's represented by a buying group who, when we transact, we're typically focusing on that group of either individuals in a B2C space or an actual committee that is going to make a decision in a B2B environment. Typically, campaigns run for 12 months or more, depending on your buying cycles. And they get broken out into what we call programs. And programs belong to program families. Program families are programs that are related by their objective. Demand generation would be a program family, and each of my demand gen programs would nest within that family. Awareness would be another program family, reputation as part of that as well. And then we might get into things like sales enablement, customer engagement, et cetera, as different types of program families. But they're really focused around the objective. What am I trying to accomplish? And then finally, the tactics are what are going to build those out. When we think back to that program level once more, we really want to focus that objective on the outcome that we're trying to achieve. So think about that as you then go to, and we'll go to the next slide here, is think about the complexity that you might need to drive into your hierarchies in order to fully flush out your landscape. Now, this is just an example of a more robust one where we might get into country marketing and divisions and breaking things out from that perspective down to individual brands and products. You might be much more of an offer focused or a product focused organization where you go straight to from business unit to product group down to the campaigns and programs. Whichever way you do it, anything that doesn't fit your hierarchy should become available to you from a segmentation standpoint. So the fact that I make my hierarchy product focused does not mean that I can't tag everything that I need to a region so that I can see things from that pivoted point of view. The other thing that we want to take note is it is a hierarchy, so we should inherit properties. So I should know, in our case, in the middle of the slide there, we've got Austria and Germany. Anything that I nest under Germany should be affiliated with Germany. Anything I nest under Austria would be affiliated with Austria. I don't have to repeat my segmentation at the deeper levels of the hierarchy. I can make use of having it at these higher levels. So when we think about setting up our segmentation, you want to segment at the highest level that gets you the granularity that you're looking for, because that means you have the least amount of work or data entry to support it. So if we do, in fact, nest things under a country hierarchy, putting that as high up as I can makes sense because everything underneath it is going to belong to that. Unfortunately, there will be a number of things that we do need to collect at the lowest level, which means we need to collect it every time. And it takes some time to do that. All right, so now I get to pass the baton, but I'll be back later over to Kathy, who's going to talk about defining marketing campaigns and then planning them out.
Thank you, Bruce. What I'm going to do is, Bruce went through that. I even saw some questions like people struggle with this. B2B organizations just struggle. And they struggle because of three reasons. There's three basic obstacles that come up first. One is a product-centric focus. And this comes up because companies and hence campaigns sometimes overly focus on products. And this happens because, you know, product teams usually own a P&L, and so they have a natural tendency to want to promote their solutions. But the problem this causes is that your campaigns are product focused, and it really shifts the burden onto the buyers to really basically sort through and decipher what's important in this message for me. Like, how does this fit my needs? The other thing is that there's multiple products. They have to sift through multiple messages to figure out what's important. And the third thing that comes up on this is there's usually a lack of portfolio management, where it's forcing buyers to figure out, like, all products are not created equal. And again, it's your duty as a marketer not to put this on your buyer, but for you to figure out, take those messages, tailor them for each specific persona at a particular stage. And when you're product focused, it ends up being more about the product and less about the buyer. So that's one obstacle. The second one's just siloed planning. And siloed planning comes up usually because of time constraints. It's annual planning time. We run out of time. So all the functional teams, digital, field, campaigns, create their plans in a vacuum. They take all their slides, they throw it into one big deck. They present it a lot of times, like Jim said, to the executive team, to the board. They get approved, great, go on a virtual shelf, we never look at it again. And that leads to really, if you have no cross-functional planning, it's not tied then to any big business goals, and it just ends up with the tactical teams having really a disjointed outreach. The other thing is there's usually a resource competition going on. Again, because those plans were created independently, no one really had an overview of capacity from your shared services, whether it's your ops team, your email team, your webinar team, which then leads to the third thing I see. Really, there's been a new term around this called collaboration drag. And if you have like a small marketing team, there's 4 or 5 of you, sure, you can create campaigns, no problem. It's easy to coordinate. Once you start adding on teams, what comes up is an increased need for coordination, for meetings, for communications. And this just leads to basically a lot of random acts of marketing, where each team, independently is doing their outreach, and they're doing it under what they control. And again, you're placing the burden on the marketer to make sense of it all. But more importantly, you're losing the impact of having a unified approach and a unified plan. So these are the 3 things we see constantly come up and to go, we're struggling with planning. But luckily, there is a solution. And what we look at is a couple things around campaign planning. One is just agreeing on the general framework. And we look at these 7 steps, but the first one is around annual planning. So what Bruce talked about, first thing you want to do in that teal box is get alignment of your marketing. And the input you're looking at is, what's the business plan? What are the objectives? What are my pipeline goals? What are the revenue goals for the year? What's going on with competition, the product roadmaps? With that, I'm taking all that information in, and usually the output from that from the CMO is a marketing plan. There's usually a product marketing document, and then there's an annual sales plan. And the people that participate in that is usually marketing leadership, sales leadership, executive leadership. Once that is done, you have your marketing plan. There's a number of things that happen, but the VP of campaigns usually has to come up and say, okay, now I have to create an annual campaign plan. And this is just in the big. Again, what are the themes I'm doing? What are the goals, objectives, persona? In the large, what am I looking at for the year to do? A lot of times I'm also looking at particular industry events, things I've already have pre-committed dollars to. And I'm collaborating closely with my content team to come up with those themes, the value props, the key messages, and probably a lot of those flagship assets. From there, you go into quarterly planning. Again, that was the high level, like Bruce talked about. What does this look like when the quarter starts? Like, what's really going to happen? So here you're looking at, what are the number of programs going to run? What are the type? Do I have the tactic mix and flow? Then I go into, I'm going to build it out. I'm going to launch it, and then I'm going to look at how to measure and do outcomes. And so you look at annual planning and you look at quarterly planning. One is at a high level, and one is the actual things you're going to do each quarter to achieve those business goals that you outlined and said where marketing was going to help. Along with that, once you have your framework everyone agrees to, you need the next level down. You need a RACI. So for every step in the process, you have to have who's responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Where do they contribute to actually the campaign planning process? Then you need a planning workflow from annual planning to launch to measurement. And again, this is where you have approvals, gates, where the teams all intersect. The execution workflow is how you're actually managing timelines, dependencies, schedules. You want to make sure that when launch day comes around, everything is ready to go. Your emails, your ads, your creative, your content. And then along with that, you need basically a planning and meeting cadence. So what are you doing on an annual, quarterly, and campaign basis? And it's for each stage, who comes to the meeting? What do I have to come prepared with? What's the agenda? What is the outcome of that meeting? What are next steps? So once you have your framework, your RACI, your workflows with SLAs, and your planning and meeting cadence, this adds to the structure that surprisingly actually makes it easier. And the one last thing we add on here to make it easy is be sure you have templates. Templates will allow you to scale. It makes it easy and gives you consistency so people on the receiving end know what to expect, and you know in every meeting going in what you need to fill out. We have a number of templates, but the main ones I'm going to show you here is the strategic or the annual campaign plan. Again, once you get your marketing plan, the VP of campaigns or demand will fill out, hey, here's my campaign, here's the theme, the objectives, the personas, here are the program families, here's what I plan to do under each one, here are any dependencies and risks, and here's the budget. Again, this makes it easy to scale. Everyone knows now what's actually going to happen this year in the big. Quarterly, then you have to come down, how am I going to actualize this? What am I actually doing to achieve those goals? So you might do a program strategy for a webinar, for an event, for a nurture program. And what's on here is what's the objective, what's the content, what's the budget, what are your KPIs, what's the offer, what's the segment. All that type of detail goes on here. So someone could actually take this, build it, and execute it. And then if you're wondering, how does this spin overall? If, like some companies, you may be starting next week on your annual planning. And again, what you want to do first is start getting all those inputs, your pipeline numbers, your business goals, your competitive intelligence, your industry trends. With that, then you start to think of, out of all those things going on for the year, what is marketing actually going to contribute? Where do we feel we can add value? You come up with the how. So what's the approach you're going to take, the goals, the key actions, and then in reality, can I do all that? Do I have the budget? Do I have the resources? What are the constraints I have? And then making sure you socialize it. Concurrently, if you're the VP of campaigns, you're going to know, hey, as they start working on the annual plan, I probably need to do a look back on my campaigns. What was the prior performance? What are things I want to stop? What do I want to continue? What do I want to start? Do I have new tech coming in this year? What are the things I need to know to put together a good annual plan for 2025? At that point, once they're socializing the annual plan, you're filling out that template. You've got your goals, your objectives, your high-level program identification, like large industry events. You've got your budget, your resource allocation. And then you want to basically socialize that with the team. I'll tell you, that's the part that really people fall down the job there. It's amazing me how many of them people just put it in a virtual shelf and never share it again. But I could have a whole section on that, Jim, so I will not go there. But in reality, though, probably not most marketers get this all done before Christmas. And so what you get into is what I call Q5. So before you start activating programs based on this new plan, and you don't have your new plan because you didn't get your goals, you didn't get your budget, sales has not figured out what segments we're going after this year, you have to keep marketing. So what I suggest is don't panic. Whatever your goals were the year before, add 10 or 15%. I've never seen a company say, we're going to cut back on your goals. Jim, you did such a great job. Do 10% less next year. Make that assumption. Just look at Q1 as Q5 and continue the programs that have done well and make that transition in Q1 as you get more information. And with Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you because this is where budget really starts to play a role. What can I actually do? I have great plans. Do I have the money to do it?
That's right. Thank you, Kathy. I'm looking forward to doing 10% less next year.
Yeah.
So as Kathy said, so now you've gone through your campaign planning process, right? That is what is the intent? The intent of the dollars, really. Like what are you trying to achieve with the dollar? So this is where you kind of come back to the dollars at this point. Now, as this campaign planning process has happened, in advance of that, there's already been say top-down allocation of budgets, right? While the marketing team starts to think about the campaigns and what they need to achieve and their objectives, and is it going to be a buyer-centric strategy, or is it going to be new markets, or are you going to offer new products, etc. In the background, the executive team has already had conversations at a high level about roughly what is the allocation going to look like, right? So you have this idea of 100% of the budget. Now, 100% of the budget can mean many different things for different companies, right? That can mean 10% of your revenues if you're a tech company, or it can mean as high as 25% of your revenues if you're a CPG organization, right? So you're talking about big dollars here. This slide was created by Forrester, Serious Decisions and then Forrester before. So we give all the credit to them because I think it's a very compelling slide and it highlights a couple challenges that marketing teams have. Your 100% of dollars then gets allocated into roughly your marketing programs and your headcount. That dominates. And this chart says, 45-45 is a balance between personnel and working dollars, if you will, in marketing program spend. There are other things that need to be accounted for, non-program services, capital expenditures, all that type of stuff. And systems can go here. If you think about your MarTech spend, the systems are going to be used universally across the marketing team. That of course accounts for some portion of your entire budget. But this is where it gets really interesting. The objective with campaign planning is to align your dollars to those campaigns. And this is actually really hard to achieve. I think many of us on this call as marketers just kind of look at our budget, and what we have is functional allocation of dollars. Here's what's going to the digital team. Here's what's going to go to the demand team. Here's what field events, trade shows, content, etc. But the problem with that is then you're giving money to everyone based on their function, and they start to think about, how am I going to spend the dollars to get my tasks done, and not thinking about those 4 to 5 high-level 12-month thematic campaigns that you need to pursue in order to hit your corporate objectives. So what Serious Decisions and then for us to advocate is to then take your marketing program spend and start to allocate it against those campaigns. And your idea here is to try and get 70% of your working dollars associated with campaigns. Why is this important? Because it keeps everyone focused on that higher level objective, that campaign, right? Better collaboration across the team. It also answers the vexing question that your CMO may get from the executive team of the board that says, you said you were going to do these 4 things or these 5 campaigns. How much are you allocating to those? What are we spending against that strategy? Show me that your dollars are working against company objectives. And so getting to this view is critically important. Now, outside of that 70%, there's what we call out of campaign spending. And depending how your organization is put together and your objectives, that may be things like a corporate event, right? Or your website. Your website supports all of your marketing. So it's kind of hard to stick it into a campaign specifically. There might be shared services in there, content or creative or branding teams that go across the organization. But it's really getting over to this campaign side where you now want to take those campaigns and start to think about the attributes that Bruce talked about. What segments are we going after this campaign, right? What geographies, what products are we supporting, what industries, et cetera, use cases. That's what you want to get to with your strategic allocation of dollars. And when you get down to that campaign, this is where the interlock starts to happen. Your marketing teams are thinking about all these campaigns they're going to do, and they're thinking about dollars. What's it going to take to actually execute all these things that are being asked to do? This is where you start to match those up, the top-down allocation to the bottoms-up budget planning. What gets in the way of this is a different language, right? Bruce talked about language matters. Well, unfortunately, the people that manage the dollars in your organization speak a very different language than the marketers that spend the dollars in your organization. And I like this slide a lot because it just illustrates, if you've ever had a conversation with your FP&A person or your controller, and they start coming to you during, say, a reconciliation meeting of your budget and asking, well, does that trade show, is that professional services, or is that travel and entertainment, or is that just marketing expense? Like, as a marketer, you think everything's a marketing expense, right? They're all working dollars. And so we advise early on to make sure there is firm alignment with marketing and finance so that how they see the world with the general ledger of accounts, their cost center allocation world can match up against marketing's view, which ties dollars to campaigns, programs, activations, etc., because it can get very complex. So really, really important to get that alignment with finance. And I will come back to that shortly. Because when you get into the execution of campaigns, that alignment with finance is going to be critically important. Now, step 6, execute campaigns. If you're in the audience, you're probably thinking, okay, that's just one chapter, one part of the 7-step process. Is a heck of a lot that goes into executing campaigns. And we absolutely acknowledge them. The intent of the blueprint, this guide, and this webinar is not to inform you on how to best execute your campaigns. You know why? Because there's probably 100 ultimate guides and definitive guides and best practices on using ABM and marketing automation and running events and running your ad spend and everything else. We're not trying to inform you of that. Our unique perspective on this part of the 7-step process is the importance of alignment that I alluded to earlier. Over the course of executing campaigns, you must be completely aligned with finance. Why is that? Because the lack of alignment with finance, right? That disconnect between how they view the world and you view the world will result in unspent dollars or overspent budgets or oversaturated segments or undersaturated segments, right? Like dollars really count, especially in this environment. And so stay tight with finance. Make sure you're socializing that plan and the investment plans meant to support your company objectives. You got to stay on the same page, right? Track what is planned, what actually gets forecasted, which could be different from the plan, right? What is actually committed? Those trade shows you signed up for, the analyst relations program, those are committed dollars, right? All of your MarTech versus what is non-committed, and then get into alignment on that reconciliation process, which should happen monthly, so you know exactly what is left in your budget at any given time. This will also help you to better understand your working versus non-working spend. The second part we'll say on execution is the absolute requirement to have one calendar to rule them all. How many of you as marketers have gone to socialize your plan, you get into the new year, and then immediately you get a question from the head of a global sales region who says, what's happening right now? What's in market? What emails have been sent? What campaigns are being executed? And you go back and you look at the plan, and then you got to get it up to date and say, well, this is what we're doing this month, etc. It's just a hassle. Gone my entire career looking for the universal marketing calendar. And it's critically important to get this. Today, unfortunately, those things can exist in more, project management tools. They can be on PowerPoints. They can be on SharePoint sites. All of those have gaps, as I think we all understand. So it's important to try and figure out how can you have a real-time view to keep the team aligned and message to your stakeholders. With that, I'm going to jump ahead to the next step, which is measuring campaign ROI and optimization. Bruce.
Thanks, Jim. And so here we go. Let's get into the final step here, step 7, and measuring our performance. And we start again with language. We need a common language for measurement. And I spent a lot of time as in my role with Forrester as heading up our marketing analytics consulting practice. And I hear a lot of the words that you're seeing across the top of these columns used interchangeably, and they're not interchangeable. They are very distinct, and they have specific functions, and we use them for specific purposes. When we think about a measure versus a metric, a measure is something that I can literally count or track or take a survey and get a response to. That is something that I measure. And some examples of those, just a few examples, are things like impressions and clicks and the amount of pipeline or the amount of revenue. It's something that I can go into a system and I can look it up and I can see where we're at. When we move from measures to metrics, it's quite simply, they are very similar, but a metric is calculated from 2 or more measures. And this is where I get into things like I can now take some of those measures. I know how much I spent. I know how many impressions I got. I put them together. I get cost per impression, cost per click, retention rates, all ratios that I might want to calculate. Those are all metrics. So sometimes people use metrics to include measures. In this case, I've got them separated so that we know exactly how to go get them. The next one we get into is dimensions. And oftentimes these get confused by I take a dimension and a metric together and I still call it a metric. And people think they have way too many metrics. The reality is you probably don't have that many metrics and measures. It's when you combine them with your segmentation that things feel like they're out of control. But if you separate those conceptually, you can get a better handle on that. So by dimensions, we're really looking at creating these components of segmentation. They often fall along the themes that we talked about for prioritization. They often fall along segmenting our buyers, segmenting our markets, segmenting our offers. and then combining those together. When we do combine them together, that's where we get to cohorts. A cohort is a combination of dimensions that specifically defines the characteristics of a group or a population that I want to analyze. And what I can do with that is typically define my cohort such that I can take a specific action when that cohort exhibits a specific behavior. So that's why I want to do cohort analysis. It allows me to really tightly target the things that I'm trying to accomplish to create more success than a blanket approach. So what about this term KPIs? That kind of muddies up the waters of the whole thing. A KPI is simply a subset of measurements and metrics elevated due to their level of importance. It's a key performance indicator. Everything else we've looked at is a performance indicator, but a key performance indicator is one that you have determined is really important to your company. It might be that there's a leading indicator. When people do this, good things happen. So we want to track that as a key performance indicator. And they're often, this is where the pairing with dimensions does often take place, where our North American retention is a leading indicator of our global retention. So I want to track that as a key performance indicator because it's really important to the decisions we make going forward. That's just a little piece on language so that you can kind of put some framework around what you're doing. And let's give it that even a little bit more context. This is a construct that Forrester had put forward about 7 or 8 years ago called the measurement spectrum. And it's a really easy way to classify the metrics and measurements themselves into these different groupings. So we would have first on the operation, I've got it split left and right. On the operational side, we would focus on inputs and outputs. And that is by inputs, we mean what is it that we do? What did I do? Did I bid? Did I place ad bids? Did I hold a webinar, etc.? Those are the things that I did. And the results that we got quite specifically are the outputs. That's just what resulted from those inputs. When we think about the operational side, that's really the type of metrics that I want to put on dashboards for departmental leaders and practitioners, the people that are focused on the day-to-day. What am I doing and what is the result of it? On the strategic side, we focus more on what's called readiness and impact. Readiness is about what did I invest in? Did I invest in enablement? Did I invest in data? Have I invested in programs? So that's really where I'm putting my money. And this is more on the strategic side. When you think about the audience for this is senior level wants to know what we're investing in. And then we want to know the impact that it has on the business. So now instead of just the basic outputs, I want to understand the impact on pipeline. I want to understand the impact on retention, on revenue, and those types of things. So as you can imagine, what we invested in and what impact we had on the business fits nicely on the strategic side, and that would go on a higher level dashboard. And it would have its commensurate dimensionality and filtering associated with it. All right. So now we got to put this together. So when we start to put it all together, we can start to build around our pyramid here from the bottom up around tactical optimizations, supporting very specific roles, and looking at the metrics that are geared toward that audience, the inputs and outputs, the website traffic and the social engagement, and then we elevate that up to our next level of campaign operations and those types of metrics. So we start now looking at, this is where we get to ROI, and this is where we get to looking at different channels and how people are engaging with them. And then we jump up one more level to the macro performance of marketing as a whole. And this is where we start looking at brand awareness and market share impact and ROI across different functions. And then ultimately that'll ladder its way up to business outcomes. And that's where we get into pure profitability, revenue impact, targeting different segments and our ABM efforts and things like that. So that's how we're going to bring it all together. Now we combine that with the segmentation and the dimensionality, and this is where we end up with our very nice Lego block, and we have a current kind of Lego theme going on to our messaging. And this is where I can now slice everything that I'm looking for, whether it's in terms of the operational metrics across the top, like the clicks and the impressions and the signups, or the inputs across the bottom in terms of the media, the social, the event, or which theme we're part of in terms of the campaigns, which products we're focused on in terms of the products. And then we see it from an outcome standpoint. We look at our business line of business sales, we look at our campaign conversions, and we can slice and dice and look at specific cohorts. And it might be that that one green cohort in the middle is the one that I'm going to get the most ROI out of. So that's the one that I'm really targeting, and I'm making sure that I've got the programs and the plans and the tactics directed in that direction so that we get the outcome that we're looking for. All right. With that, I'll turn it back over to our host, Jim.
Thank you, Bruce. That is a whirlwind tour of the 7-step marketing planning process. Again, we call it a blueprint. There's a lot there. It's a lot to unpack. We totally understand that. And today's webinar is not meant to turn everybody on it into experts in every step of this. That's going to require a bit more work and a bit more guidance, a bit more content, frankly. And so with the knowledge that planning season is coming, we do have several other things. Today, we're going to give everyone, as we said, a recording of today's presentation. But along with that will come a very straightforward planning assessment checklist. We listed a lot of steps, a lot of things you should consider, a lot of to-dos. Put that into our checklist for you and just use it as a guide as you start to think about the planning season that's upon us. Start thinking about which of these things am I prepared to do right now? Do I have the right people, the right content, the right metrics, the right data? Am I talking with the right people across the organization in order to make my way through this 7-step checklist? So look for that in your email. We'll follow up in August with the launch of the marketing planning blueprint, right? That is a comprehensive piece of content that goes into detail on each of the 7 steps. It also lists rough timelines for the planning process, depending on the size of the organization, who gets involved, key functions, best practices and tips that we've learned from working with many, many organizations about their planning process. Look for that in August. And then because many of you will come back, like I will, from my August vacation, and boom, it's there. Tight deadlines, planning process, collaboration, lots of meetings, negotiations, as the case may be. In September, we will launch, working with Inverta, a workbook. You saw a lot of those frameworks, right? A lot of those best practices, kind of guides that you can download and use as templates. That'll be in the workbook that Inverta will be launching in September. And in pairing with that, we'll have a number of workbook sessions to help get you up to speed on how to best use them for your organization. So think about it that way. Today marks a start, but over the next several months, we'll be providing more content for you. With that, it's 12:48. Let's get to the questions. Before I jump to the questions, just a reminder, because there was some questions in the channel about, well, how do you get to this universal, always on-demand calendar? Well, if you want to stick around for what we call the backstage pass after the webinar, please do. We'll actually walk you through what a system of record for plan and spend looks like, a platform to help manage this process. That's a reminder, stick around and Drew will do that. But for now, let's get back to the questions. The first question that came in relatively early on, it's actually one of many questions from Matt, which was really good ones, is I think that's worth addressing. So Bruce, I'm going to ask you to address this one. How do you feel about adding contingencies into your planning process? Or is it not worth it as you don't know exactly why or how you'll need to pivot over the course of the plan?
So thanks, Jim. And I love this question because I think the answer depends on your specific situation. If you're in a market that is not experiencing a lot of volatility, it's pretty stable right now, then yes, I absolutely would have very specific, well thought out contingencies, a few of them that point in either direction, whether it's scenario planning for a 5% increase or decrease. I would know exactly what I'm going to do in those circumstances. Whereas the more volatile the market is, then I think you have to be a little bit looser in those contingencies. Now we start talking about things like a 25% or a 40% increase or decrease in our budgets. I'm going to have to be a little more flexible in how I adapt to those, because that means market conditions are changing dramatically, and the decision that I make based on the market conditions during my planning might be very different than during my execution. So yes, contingencies are important. The more volatile your markets are, the more flexible I think you need to be.
Good answer. I'm going to follow on with another question from Matt because he's had some good ones in here. He said that with so many organizations cutting staffing and asking others to do more with less, et cetera, et cetera. I think we've all heard that. How do we sell this kind of complexity as necessary? Maybe Bruce, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So this one might be counter to people's thinking, and once I state the answer, you'll kind of get where I'm coming from. In good times, people throw resources at problems. So you add people without regard when you're growing and things are going really great, and you can just throw bodies at the problem. The issue is when you start cutting, you have to get better at planning. So the more you are cutting, the tighter the belt gets, the better you have to get at planning. And I can explain this with a real easy analogy. When I was growing up, my father was the ultimate planner. And my parents had more free time than any other parents out there because of how good he was at planning and how much planning they did. And as a kid, I had no idea how hard it was to do all the things that they did until you become an adult and you start doing it on your own. So I lived through the consequences of not planning in my own, but saw what it meant. And it means free time, and it means the ability to really execute on things. So take the time and do that planning. And if they're cutting costs, double down on the planning so that you make the most of what money you have left.
Great insights. Thank you, Bruce. I will say that my parents were really good at cost cutting. I'm not so sure about planning, but there's a couple other questions I think are worth getting to. Kathy, maybe you can take this one because I hear this an awful lot. Who is ultimately responsible for leading this planning process?
To me, it's the CMO, the head of marketing. Like, you can't wait on others. If others aren't going to deliver, like I said, that's why you have a Q5, not a Q1. At the end of the day, no one wants to hear, well, I didn't get to it because some other team didn't do it. I didn't get my numbers from finance. Like, you just have to, with the information do the best plan you can. You're either responsible or irresponsible, I think was the line I once heard.
It's good insight. I will say that we obviously work with hundreds and hundreds of companies around planning, managing the planning process. Yes, ultimately it is the CMO, but often the CMO will assign a team or even an individual to help on the collaboration involved in the planning process. So we have seen this role, chief of staff to the CMO, pop up very frequently in our conversations, and they're actually coordinating between finance and marketing and managing the timings, deadlines, and deliverables and everything else. There's that, and we also have seen what we call the rise of marketing operations, from managing a MarTech stack and doing analytics to taking on this new role of getting into kind of strategic ops and planning. And I will say, a little hint there, the blueprint will talk about what marketing operations role in the planning process can be and should be. I think
I agree,
Jim.
I've seen two of those roles. I've seen two of those roles come up. But yes.
This is a good one too. What is the biggest challenge for marketing teams during these 7 steps? I'd love to hear from both of you on this. Kathy, we'll stick with you to start, but there's a lot of challenges and through these 7 steps. Mm-hmm. Which one have you seen to really bite teams?
To me, it's the siloed planning. Like, everyone really meaning well, but they don't coordinate, and you just have 6 different plans at the end, and that just leads to total chaos later on. I mean, everyone means well, but it's like, it's easy to get it done on your own. Why should I work with them? They weren't ready. Europe didn't get their stuff to me. So I think getting someone to coordinate across all those teams, where I've seen probably the biggest, like, people just shrug, oh, just get it done on my own. Bruce, I'm curious where you come across it.
So again, so what Kathy said is absolutely true. Where I come across it is the piece that Jim talked about, and that's the budget side. If you truly set a goal to have 70% of your budget be campaign or purpose driven, the stuff within the campaign by definition has to be coordinated across the silos. So at least you know that that big chunk of your program spend is being coordinated. And if you can keep the other side under 30%, well, you can deal with a little bit of silo work. It's practical, and it's driven by the functions, but at least they're aware of all the other campaign stuff they're doing, and at least it's coordinated from that respect. So yeah, I would agree with you, Kathy, that the silo is the biggest place people get derailed. But there's a real simple metric to follow. It's that 70-30 rule. If you can get 70% of the money into the campaigns, you're pretty much insulating against those silos.
Good perspective. I'm going to add one more, not that we want to belabor the challenges involved in this process, although I did say generally marketing is not great at planning. And that's this notion of impact modeling. And what I mean by that is, if you leave marketing teams to their own devices, they'll come up with all types of great ideas. We could do this and this and this and this and this. But kind of where the rubber meets the road is holding them accountable to what the outcomes are. What expected outcomes are you going to get from this set of webinars, this roadshow, sponsoring this trade show, doing a giant user event, whatever it might be? What do you expect to do? And often that's a conversation that is based on, as I said, kind of gut feel and hunches, when it really should be a bit more of a mathematical process where you say, if you were to execute these plans, give me some estimates on the ultimate impact in sales, revenue, profitability, margins, whatever it might be. Go through that mathematical exercise, build your funnel, make some assessments about, how many responses you're going to get, and tell me what that outcome is. And then line all of those up across your campaign plans to make hard decisions about what will actually be funded or not.
But I think, Jim, what I see missing around that is people do these large campaign plans and annual plans, but they don't get socialized. So like if you're the email person or the webinar person, you're just like, well, I do 6 webinars a month or a quarter or whatever. And so it's never tied to that. So I don't think people don't think that way, where if you had your annual plan on a page, here are the goals. Every measurement meeting should be for every team member, how did you contribute to one of these 3 goals? And I think you have to change that mindset. That doesn't get socialized. So they do come down to, I don't know, this is the tactic, because marketing is so specialized now. We are by function. There's the SEO person, there's the digital person, there's the webinar person. It is, and so I think it's really hard when you do a campaign across to say, what are you laddering up to? I bet if you stop people in the hall and ask, what is your big mission? How are you tying in? They'd be like, I don't know. I do webinars. I do marketing ops. I do Marketo. They can't tie together.
That's good. It's a really good point. It is an ongoing challenge. Go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I think the impact modeling is incredibly important, and I think it has to do with this concept of what we call plan integrity, and that is by definition that if properly executed, my marketing plan will result in me reaching my goals. The only way to prove the integrity of a plan is to do the math. And I know we don't like to do the math, but it starts with the laddering up from the impressions to the responses to the engagement to the conversions. And you've got to do that math so that you can at least predict that the plan I've put in place, if we properly execute it, is going to result in me achieving my goals. Many organizations, and we've done this in surveys and live in front of audiences, I've asked the question, don't do enough impact modeling, that they don't even know whether or not they could achieve success if they in fact executed on their plan. And I think that's a really valid point.
I think a lot of times because they just measure it on revenue or MQL, so everyone has to say, well, I generated MQL or I generated revenue, even though you ran an ad. But we're at time, we could go on this topic. So
if we had time, but the one resource I think we wrestle with the most as marketers is actually minutes, even more so than dollars. So we're actually out of time. We use full hour. There's some great questions in there, so thank you for contributing, audience. And now, as I said, before I say goodbye, I thought I would turn over to my good friend Drew, who will go through what we call the backstage pass. So if you want to stick around and see exactly what Uptempo's planning software does and how it helps you to manage this whole process with a single system of record, please do. It's about a 10-minute walkthrough, not to put too much pressure on you, Drew, but about a 10-minute walkthrough of how we kind of manage that planning, calendaring, activity, budget management to outcomes process.
So today I will be showing you how those 7 steps that we just went through today, with all of that knowledge and all of the unpacking that we all have to do, how those things can be realized in a single platform with Uptempo. And in Uptempo, for marketers or any users that are accessing the system, everything is broken up into easy to understand modules. And we kind of bucket these things into 2 different areas. We have our planning between strategy and activities. And then we also have our budgets and investments, so the spend side of the house. And we'll talk about how those 2 interrelate. But really, to start, when we think about strategic planning and having to align to business goals and set marketing strategy and goals, so both steps 1 and 2, this is done within the strategy module, where we can articulate those business objectives and have those documented within the tool, and how those cascade to marketing's priorities and goals, and then ultimately cascading to the key actions. Those key actions can in turn be linked to different lines of investment, which we'll show you in a little bit here. But what's important about this is it's not just about getting the data in. We need to understand the relationship between these. So if I click on any one of these goals within the tool, I can see how they're interconnected, both up to those business level objectives and down to those key actions and what's serving and supporting those different initiatives. And if I open up any one of these goals, this is where I can then add in additional details such as status update, key measurements. I can even assign owners to all these pieces. And the strategy isn't just necessarily let's put pen to paper and have this information in the system. This can also be supported in our activities module, where we can visualize those plans in a timeline manner, so I can see what I'm planning and when across different strategic initiatives, across different strategic programs, and having all of that documented in one system. And the great thing about this is, you think about strategic planning, there's often collaboration. There's multiple meetings. There are points and times where individuals need to get access to that information. And instead of it living in PowerPoint and in emails, this can live in Uptempo using workflows. And workflows give you the ability of putting a defined process or structure, a workflow to that strategic planning, where you can have approvals as well as documenting detailed information about what you're doing at any level within that plan. Whether it's something like a SWOT analysis, where I'm determining my strengths and weakness for this year, maybe even a PESTLE analysis, whatever that might be, these can be configured in the tool. They can live in one place. And this is where I can then collaborate with colleagues outside of those meetings where we're doing that discussion. This in turn is then used to support the planning process. And this is done inside the activities module. And what we have here is a way to define and plan our campaigns through simple configuration. And the beauty of this module is that the planning process is supported through a flexible model that enables multiple different plan types with their own structures and their own requirements to coexist. And so if I use that strategic plan as an example, I of course have my top level plan where I can see all that plan summary that I'm pulling from the workflow. I might have details on my strategic initiatives. We have a completely different structure than what I'm doing for my channel marketing plan, where I might have individual campaigns where now I'm communicating the messaging or the theme. And if I dive down a little bit deeper, I have my programs where now I'm looking at things from an objective perspective. What am I offering? What's the program family that I'm working with? And continuing on down to the individual tactics as well as activations, where I care about what is the customer journey stage that I'm focusing on. Maybe those different planning scenarios, so I can optimize and consider, yes, I can execute against this if I have more budget. Maybe I need to remove it if I have less. Even things like target persona, as well as other details, can be synced into the tool and documented here. Now, I saw this question in the chat. Having one holistic view is incredibly powerful. And the activities module, of course, supports multi-year planning, but it's also the place for everyone to see things from a perspective that matters to them. And this is done by simple filtering and grouping using any of those attributes within that hierarchy. So if I quickly want to do an example of this, I might go in and say I want to see things by target persona. By grouping by target persona at the appropriate level within my plan, I can now get all of those activities underneath my specific program, as well as the campaign ultimately rolling up into my plan. Now, for those teams that might be focused on a very specific subset of activities, maybe events. If I use a quick example here, filter out everything else within my plan, all I care about is events, I can get all those details, again, still grouped by my target persona, but now filtered for that. And I can then, of course, review this throughout the year as I'm continuing on with my planning. Where this becomes incredibly powerful is that all these activities don't really sit by themselves. They're not standalone components. They are integrated across the entire ecosystem here. So if I just refresh my screen, I can go through and give you an example of what that might look like. So let's click on this Q1 digital banner ad. I've got all my details here. I fill this out using a simple form process. Once I have that in place, I then need to start considering how I am funding this. And this can be done in a couple of different ways. We can articulate it as estimated costs, which is a simple, hey, I'm expecting this, but I don't really have any budget set aside for it. I haven't really planned for it. This is just my gut check feeling of getting those details in here. And this can be used as both a top-down guidance as well as bottom-up roll-up. So I can see all those different activities that reside within the plan underneath this. Ultimately, though, these activities, whatever level they are in the plan, can be connected to spend. So whatever funding source I might have, whatever budget bucket or team, I can connect it to individual line items, which then allows me to have granular information on what am I funding, how am I funding it, who's funding it, and so on. And if I use another example here with my Q2 banner ad, I can actually see I have details on my forecast, how that's different from my plan spend, and so on. And what this enables you to do is ultimately track budget from multiple different buckets and see how that ladders up into those individual activities within the plan. And I can very easily click on the magnifying glass in order to trace this to its source. It will select it automatically for me. And now I can get details on that line of spend, such as information on the supplier, maybe the cost center that's associated with this, and so on. And now this is the other piece of the platform. So we've shifted from steps 3 and 4, where we're talking about defining our plans and our campaigns and being able to actually do that planning exercise. How do we finalize the marketing budget? Well, of course, a lot of this is going on in the background. And within Uptempo, it's organized really into those two areas, our budgets and our investments. Investment plans are a place where I can get out of spreadsheets and go in and document my plan values and structure these however I operate as a function. In this example, I'm using the digital media team as a quick and easy way to understand where I am and what I'm doing. I can also very quickly, provided I have access, jump to any one of the other budgets within the tool in order to see what I have going on and where. All of the details are available to me at any point in time. So as I'm looking at this from a spend perspective, I need to understand what budget I have available, how much I have left to plan, and whether or not I'm aligned to those strategic objectives. By clicking on any of these, I can, of course, get back to those detailed panels where I might see additional information about how this is rolling up to finance in order to be able to give them their perspective on what we're doing and where without losing the granular details that we need. By having all of this spend in one system, we can then integrate with ERP and back office purchasing tools in order to bring in our committed values as well as actuals. So at any point in time, I can filter on this, slice and dice, and see the roll-ups across that entire budget, but ultimately looking at this across the entire organization where I can roll up from all those budgets to see how we're doing for Solus, this fictitious company, what we've committed so far, what we have for our actuals, and all of those details. Now, when we want to execute against these pieces, this can be done through integration. We can, of course, use workflows, but we can also use simple action buttons in order to connect different systems within the tool and drive information into those downstream systems, such as project management. So if I use a simple example here, let's say I need to create a Salesforce campaign. By creating that Salesforce campaign, I now have a connection to that system. And this would then allow me to then pipe back any funnel data or performance data into the system so that not only do I have my plan and I have the spend, but ultimately I have the performance against this particular campaign. This could also be done with a project management tool such as Workfront. A simple action button can push all of my briefing information over into that system, meaning I have now increased efficiency where I don't have to do duplicative entry between multiple tools. And then we can ultimately bring back things like the project status, the owner, deadlines, things along those lines. And I can then use that to sort, pivot, and filter on my plan. At the end of the day, at step 7, we then need to measure and optimize. This can be done using Uptempo's built-in impact modeler, where within the tool, I can make assumptions on what kind of engagement I'm going to drive. Those can be modeled out based on funnel assumptions. So we can track and use different conversion rates, different velocities, as well as different deal sizes. And based on what I am planning, the target audience, the region, the product or service, all of those attributes can in turn adjust the model and give us a prediction of when we should hit our engagement, as well as when we should expect the revenue impact. And this is particularly important for long deal cycles where marketing has gone out. We may not see the impact in revenue for a couple of months. Over time, as those actuals come back in, we then can understand whether or not our predictions were accurate and adjust our models going forward. But more importantly, all of this information now resides in one system where we can look at that model, roll up to a higher level, such as our programs or even our campaigns, and have all of that information visualized for us throughout the plan very quickly and very easily. This can also be done in a very efficient manner across the spend and different KPIs, as well as things like, as Bruce talked about, the different measures and metrics. We can see them in a simple roll-up summary view articulated via our plan. And if I use a quick example here, I have it saved as another tab. If I want to look at those details as, target personas, and then we'll filter again by our different activations. We'll just narrow down to tactics here just to keep it simple. I can then still use that summary view in order to analyze what information I have across those tactics. I can see the overall roll-up. I can see it by those target personas or whatever attributes I'm using, as well as having those ROI calculations. So for any other individuals that might be accessing the plan, they can get to that information very quickly and easily, but you can too, which then gives you the ability to act much quicker using data-driven decisions. And with that, that's how you can accomplish all 7 steps within Uptempo.
Thank you, Drew. That was a great walkthrough of the product. Thanks for that. Listen, for those of you who stuck around with the Backstage Pass, we appreciate it. Hope you learned something about the Uptempo platform. Again, look for our checklist, webinar recording, blueprint, workbooks, all types of good stuff in the coming weeks and months. And enjoy your summer. Thank you.